How are we doing today? I see some sleepy eyes, food-induced coma, I guess. Well, I hope all of you will stay awake for this presentation. I'm going to try to be as entertaining as possible on a not very entertaining topic. So a lot of you are probably thinking about throwing GDPR to the back of your head, especially after a great summer vacation on the beach with cocktails. But c'est la rentrée, so let's get serious. My name is Judy Boniface-Chang. I am the Chief Customer and Marketing Officer at Mailjet, a platform that helps deliver and also create marketing campaigns, automated messages, transactional emails, and SMS. Today, I am going to talk about how some of the growth marketing practices you have been relying on will get you in trouble in GDPR. So let's get started. For some of you who I hope a very few of you would not know what GDPR is, and also a reminder for those who understand what GDPR is. GDPR is a European regulation to give control of personal data to European citizens. What that means is it gives consumers rights to access, control, correct, modify their data, or have it ported, have it deleted by companies who hold them. And it also gives European data protection authorities the rights to levy big fines if privacy rules are broken. You might ask why updated this year? Well, you know, the last time the regulation was updated was in 1995. That was before Facebook or Google were even born. And when we read about, you know, virtual reality, AI, you know, autonomous vehicle only in sci-fi novels. So most of you who have been following the Facebook data scandal and maybe have followed Mark Zuckerberg's testimony in Congress would know that GDPR is something not to be messed with. For those of you who don't know what happened with the data scandal, it really began with 87 million user data being improperly shared with a political campaign firm called Cambridge Analytica. And Cambridge Analytica was unfortunately tied to Donald Trump's presidential campaign. So it's a big deal. What happened was, when investigators looked more into Facebook, they found out that actually some of the apps, the games, the quizzes that you've taken on Facebook have security issues in terms of data protection. And so that created a lot of questions in people's mind. Just who have access to their deeply personal data and what they're doing with it. To date, even to date, Facebook is still trying to recover from their share price from that one day in July when their market cap of $150 billion were wiped out because Mark Zuckerberg talked to investors about how the reputational damage impacted their user growth, lost their key advertising partners, and have 3 million or more European citizens completely abandoning, not coming back to their platform. And Facebook is not the only company that have this issue. So since GDPR came into effect, you know, data breach reports filed by consumers have increased significantly in EU countries because consumers now have the right and power to do something. And the data protection authorities have started prosecuting cases in different member states. And so in France, CNIL has started prosecuting a few cases, including the Optical Center, who was fined recently. Thomas Bechtel talked a lot about how companies' effort in GDPR compliance has been largely inadequate to date. What he means is that, you know, much like me, all of you's inboxes were probably flooded with privacy updates and consent emails at the end of May, just before GDPR came into effect. at Mailjet, we sent more than 100 million emails just the day before GDPR came into effect. So a lot of people were struggling to kind of become compliant. If your company is one of these companies who think that sending a privacy update email, changing a little bit about the email practices, opt-in subscription practices, is enough to meet GDPR requirements, I'm sorry, you have to think again. GDPR is something not to be taken lightly. And you might think that, but we're not Facebook, or at least not yet. I hope some of you become one. We might be able to fly under the radar. Like the Data Protection Authority never will pick on us. But you have to think about this. Consumers now have more rights, more power. They will want to file a complaint against you if you blatantly ignore their data privacy concerns. And there might be, on the other hand, some opportunistic lawyers who might think this is a great chance to file class action lawsuits with a lot of people who are really unhappy about companies' data protection practices. So today I'm not going to talk about GDPR because it's a huge scope and I'm not a lawyer, but I'm going to talk about some of the marketing practices that you might be using that would really kind of obviously get you in trouble and have people file complaints against you. There are 3 pillars of marketing, that GDPR impacts. We'll go through the basics. Data permission is all about opt-in, which means you need to have explicit consent from people who you contact and have that consent completely documented. So this means that a pre-ticked box in your subscription form is not going to cut it. That is a breach of GDPR. Data rights, on the other hand, is talking about how consumers have the rights to their data, to access it, to correct it, and also have it completely removed from your database. So from an email marketing sense, it means that you have to include an unsubscribe link in all the email communication you send to them. Data minimization is actually quite conceptual, has something to do with IT, but in this case, as marketers, we are asked by our business, we're required to derive meaningful insights based on big data to help businesses grow. That often means that we're collecting data on everyone, from everywhere, on everything. But under GDPR, we are required to think privacy by design. And this means that we need to actively think about what data we collect on whom, how we process it and store it, instead of collecting data points that we may or may not use excessively. All of you are probably familiar with these growth marketing tactics. So let's go through each one of them and see how GDPR impacts them. Some of you may have been purchasing databases. So third-party contact lists, either bought or scraped from the web, are likely based on no consent at all or minimal non-explicit consent. This means that people that you call or you text or you email are likely going to be those who do not really want to hear from you or not interested in your product or services. GDPR doesn't say that you can't buy list, doesn't state that. But if you send emails or contact people on these lists, they might file a complaint against you. So be careful with that. Consent is really something that is a core part of GDPR. Clear consent means that you have to explicitly explain why you're doing something to the consumer, why you're collecting their data. Double opt-in is a good practice. Why? Because it actually avoids bots signing up to your newsletter or creating ghost accounts that you don't know about. It's important to have this confirmation email because you have to actually prove that you have consent when you're audited by the Data Protection Authority. And so having this confirmation email gives you the date and timestamp of when that consent is given to you. And lastly, people need to be able to opt out as easily as they opt in. So these are some of the changes that we've made at Mailjet to help adapt the changes to our email practices for GDPR. So clear messaging, having a confirmation email, and having, you can't really see behind the chair, unsubscribe link at the bottom so people can just as easily opt out as opting into your communication. One important thing to note, though, here is that consent, I talked a lot about consent. It's only one of the 6 legal bases for processing data, personal data, under GDPR. This conference is all about B2B. So in a B2B context, arguably speaking, we could imagine contacting people under legitimate interest. What is legitimate interest? So you probably have received emails from some B2B companies asking you to set up a time for a demo for their product or services. And what that means is if there is an alignment between what the company is selling and what you may be interested in, then legitimate interest could arguably be established. But that can only be established if you have not refused to receive communication from this company. If you have sent something back to them saying, stop bothering me, I really don't care about your product or services, then if they continue to send email communications to you, you can potentially file a complaint against them and perhaps get them in trouble. Let's switch gear to talk about Dropbox. Does everyone know what Dropbox does? Yes, I see some nods. Okay. So Dropbox is an interesting example, and you probably have not heard about this. So from September 2008 to, I believe, January 2010, in less than 1.5 years, their user base grew from 100K to 4 million. It's insane, the growth. It is it makes them the godfather of modern referral programs. And even though this is a textbook example of viral marketing, what happened under GDPR is that the consent from the person who receives the referral is the cause of most concern. I will give you an example. So a fake solution called, say, CMO Time Tracker wants to run a referral program. And they get my email address from my friend Mark, who is their customer. They send me an email communication with marketing materials and promotional content without my explicit consent. And then on top of that, they store some of the personal details of me on their databases without my explicit consent. And so if they do that, under B2B, it's kind of a muddy water. Because you could argue, oh yeah, I'm a CMO, they do CMO time tracker, so maybe their solution is meaningful to me. But under B2C, you are completely in the breach territory. So if you and your businesses are thinking about referral program, there are referral programs that get around this by actually triggering a message template in the referrer's email webmail services or social media message. So in this case, Mark's inbox or Facebook Messenger, and have a pre-made template, have Mark send the message directly to me. So the referral program solution does not touch my data and does not store anything. So think about this when you're thinking about using a referral program solution to make sure that you're not breaching GDPR without consent. Marketing automation is a huge part of growth marketing tactics, right? I'm sure a lot of you today are using it. It is arguably one of the powerful things where you can use to send messages to the right people at the right time. But you have to make sure that your consent is up to date. So your automation sequence needs to be completely synced in real time with your CRM. There are people who might withdraw consent today, and they're still in your automation sequence. And so they could arguably say, hey, I have filed a request to be removed. Why are you still sending it to me? So you need to make sure that alignment is there. This brings kind of the complication here. How do you handle these kind of bulk requests? What if you have 100 people telling you today that they want to be removed from your database? And here we're not just talking about like being unsubscribed from a mailing list or being added to a suppression list where nothing goes to them. It is about removing their data or anonymizing it completely in your CRM. And that is a huge undertaking. If so there are some IT people here, you understand what I mean. And so can you handle these these requests automatedly? Can you handle it in bulk? At Mailjet, we developed a solution just to do that because it's necessary under GDPR. When people submit a removal request, they have to be anonymized completely in our database. And for our larger clients that have hundreds and thousands of contacts that need to process these requests in real-time basis because of requirement for GDPR, this is something super important. So the API endpoint that they can use with our solution is something that will help them become compliant with GDPR. You might have heard about these data enrichment solutions. Data enrichment solutions are meant to enhance your automation sequences. How it does it is that it looks at people who arrive on your website, it extracts IP addresses and send that IP address to a third-party vendor like Snitcher or Clearbit, and they will return a company detail, which you then send to full contact to extract the executive's information, then for you to create automated messages, to set up a demo, set up a meeting, drip campaign, so on and so forth. Under GDPR, IP addresses are actually personal data. So it's something that you need to consider treating very carefully. So you, as a data controller, and the third-party vendor solutions that you use for these data enrichment, as data processors, would need to be GDPR compliant. You need to assess how ready they are, what kind of data protection structure they have in place, and if they do, work out a data protection agreement with them under EU model contract clauses, because this is one way that you could protect yourself. You might kind of wonder, a lot of the things I talk about lead to email, right? Because email is one of the things that connect all the data points in your CRM, whether it's professional or personal. And so your communication with your prospect or your customers through this email address is a very important way for you to build trusting relationship with them, or it could expose your weaknesses in data protection under GDPR. Here are some questions. It's a checklist of things that you should ask your email service provider because they can be one of your biggest liability for GDPR compliance. I think there's someone from Mailjet here who, well, Elise, are you here? Great. Okay, can you stand up? Yeah. So if everyone wants a checklist for that, please find her afterwards. We at Mailjet send 2 billion emails every month. That's a lot of personal data that we have to protect on behalf of our clients, the email addresses, the templates, the messaging, and of our own. So to become GDPR compliant, we had to overhaul our entire IT infrastructure, our legal processes, our marketing practices, to protect the integrity of our clients' data as well as that of our own. And to do that, it really requires cross-organizational effort. So legal department needs to work with IT, with marketing, even ops. This is an example of how our marketing department works with legal to build a privacy update email, real time. You know how working with legal is. Lots of back and forth, lots of approval. With our tool on Google, it's on Google Cloud, but it's mostly like how Google Doc works. You could actually shorten the time for feedback and approval and make sure that you're moving as fast as possible. And this is an example of that. Okay, almost at the end. You're almost there. In closing, I just want to say that I believe that GDPR is actually a good opportunity for us to build a really meaningful relationship based on trust and transparency with our customers. It forces businesses to take a hard look at what data they have on their customers, make sure it's minimized, but then also they're collecting the most meaningful data, increasing data quality, so that they could develop the most personalized approach to grooming a better, more trusting customer relationship. Because this loyal customer relationship is what is going to fuel a sustainable growth for your business. So I hope all of you kind of take something away from today's presentation and and try to become GDPR compliant because it's good for your business. Thank you.